Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight. We want to talk about how people use information in their decision making and how they make decisions. It's one of those things that doesn't often appear on curricula. It's one of those things that we sort of expect people to do, but don't really give them too much explicit help on how to get there. And I'm going to start with an analogy, because human beings are really good at learning and using analogies in their decision making. So for example, if we've got a problem now and we've seen a similar problem, not quite the same, but a similar problem, we'll often use the previous similar problem and what we did for it and apply that solution to this almost the same problem. And sometimes that works really well and sometimes it doesn't. I want to start with this analogy. And I know we're at Kew University and we're in North Staffordshire and we're in England, and there aren't many aficionados of baseball in the audience. Am I right? Not many people know too much about baseball. Okay, well, you don't have to. I'll just explain baseball to you. I need to say that this is an analogy that I've taken from a talk by Brian Goldman, who's an A&E doctor in Toronto, and it's such a great analogy that I had to steal it shamelessly and use it to kick us off tonight. So, baseball. Okay, so I'm the batter, yeah, and Greg, you're the pitcher. And you're going to throw the ball at me at 100 miles an hour, and I've got to hit it into the field of play, which is an arc going like that in front of me. And if I hit it into the field of play and it doesn't get caught, I stand a chance of helping the team score a run. Okay? That's baseball. Yeah? So the question, so baseball's big business in the States, huge multi-billion pound business, and every aspect of the game of baseball is analysed to the nth degree with all sorts of performance statistics. Yeah? So the question is, how good do you have to be on the team and getting paid millions of dollars a year as a batter? So how many times out of 10 do you successfully hit the ball into the field of play? Yeah? Well, let me tell you, it's 3 out of 10. 3 out of 10, you're a really good batter. You'll earn lots of money, you'll be well thought of by your peers and the fans, and you'll get a contract for the next year very easily. And the way this appears in the statistics is not 3 out of 10, but 300 out of 1,000. It's the same. So a 300 batting average is very good. A 400 batting average is legendary. It happens once in 30 years. And you go down in the annals of the sport. So 4 times out of 10 is absolutely as good as it gets. So here we are. We're training nurses, pharmacists, doctors, etc. Yeah? And we're sending them out from our great institutions, like this one, and we expect their batting average not to be 300 or 400. In fact, the expectations we put on them is that they should have a batting average of 1.000. There shouldn't be mistakes made. Yeah? But we don't really give them too much explicit help on how to get their batting average as good as it can be. And lots of this is about how we as human beings react to those situations. So you don't get baseball players, golfers, footballers, airline pilots mindlessly going out and practicing whatever they do now. They get feedback on how they're doing. They get coaching on what their emotional responses are in given situations, and they get help to be able to perform maximally, not just physically on a skill set or knowledge on the knowledge side, but actually on controlling their response and their decision making under key circumstances. So they get it, but we don't. Lots of this is about us pulling together bits and pieces from lots of other people. I wouldn't say that we've done that much innovative ourselves in acquiring what we're going to run through tonight. but we have lent on other disciplines and pulled together stuff over about 15 years from a variety of research streams. And it does mean, I think, that we've now come up with something that is quite interesting and appears to be, from the work that I've been doing over the last year, pretty useful as well. So people not only like it, but seem to get it, and it helps them. So we're trying to unpack the fact that in a clinical situation, we've got all of the constellations of signs and symptoms over at this side of the chalkboard. Yeah? That's all of that complex signs and symptoms in a clinical encounter. And we've got to devise a complex management plan, but how you get from this to making a diagnosis and how to constructing that into a management plan sort of sits in this black hole. And we just expect people to pick it up a bit by osmosis. So we're trying to unpack all of that stuff. So I'm not dismissing the work of the evidence-based medicine movement over the last 20 years, who spent their time constructing systematic reviews and guidelines as the answer to improved decision making. Clearly those are the foundation stones that we need, foundation stones. But we need to be on the higher floors of this. We need to be in the penthouse suites in terms of maximising our ability when we're making decisions with and for patients. So what we're trying to put together is an elevator that will get you from here's the evidence to here's how we use it skillfully in a clinical encounter. Now, because this involves a human-to-human encounter, this is complex as opposed to complicated. Yeah? A complicated problem can be broken down into its constituent parts. Each of those constituent parts can be quality assured, replicated, and you can end up with a quality product pretty much every time. So, building a Mercedes or a BMW car, yeah? You break it down and you build it and you can get a consistent standard. You can have a fantastic process for a nice guideline, having broken down what you need to do, and by and large, with a few exceptions, you get a fantastic guideline every single time because it's process driven. Yeah? Complex problems, those human-to-human interactions, are different from complicated problems. Complex problems can't be fixed. Complex problems are like bringing up a child. So you can read all of the books there are about child rearing, and if you followed the advice in them, you're still not guaranteed that well-rounded adult at the end, because all sorts of other human-to-human interactions come in the middle. Their friends, their peers, their teachers, their whatevers, yeah, all get in the way. So, sure, there are some things with complex problems that are better than others. Sure, there are some things that you can do that help with complex problems. But don't raise your expectations to the point where we can fix decision making in healthcare with this sort of stuff. There are just some things that we don't do and are better than others. That's the caveat. So here's a quote. Here's a quote from a GP registrar in West Yorkshire. Sometimes I feel completely overwhelmed with the fact that I don't know enough information about some critical decisions that I make every day. And our response to that usually is, go away and work harder. Except when we stand back and think about it, working harder isn't a solution. You can never know absolutely everything, and you can never recall just at the point where you need it absolutely everything that you need. And there's that messy thing of the patient in the clinical encounter, and they'll have their own views and preferences on what the diagnosis is and frankly what should be done about it as well, even if those aren't explicitly stated in the encounter itself. Critical appraisal. We used to teach critical appraisal. Done lots of critical appraisal teaching in my time. People would do the 3-day critical appraisal course, go away and say, fantastic course, Neil. And 6 months later I'd go back to them and say, what are you doing? And they say, not much. And isn't it difficult? Oh, and I've forgotten. It says, I have a pile of BMJs at home this high, but I don't ever read them. I sometimes carry them around in my bag in case if I kind of osmotically get the information. But time-wise, it's easier to look it up on GP Notebook, the summary thing that's just on the computer there, which has a variable track record in terms of being referenced. We all suffer from information overload. I'm not going to say too much more about information overload, but we only have to look at our email inboxes to realise we can never be on top of stuff anymore. It's just impossible. I came back from holiday on Monday, 730 emails, despite having the iPad with me on holiday and dealing with as many as I could. And this is not a new problem. I was in Ireland earlier this year. This is the Long Room in Trinity College in Dublin, and they've got these incredibly valuable medieval leather-bound books, and you just have to look at that and think, you can't read those in a lifetime. You simply can't get through it all. It's just not possible. And even if you could, how could you remember it just at that point in time? We have to do something different from saying, read more, learn more, try and remember more. So let's go back to evidence-based practice. This is the Dave Sackett definition. The Dave Sackett definition was all about individual decision-making. It wasn't about industrial scale production of systematic reviews and guidelines. It was all about bringing the evidence into the consultation explicitly and using that evidence as one of the components of a great decision. So, representing that graphically, it looks like this, except that we've tended to focus on this. This is what should drive practice, and we've downplayed patients' needs, values and preferences substantially, and we've certainly, I think, undermined clinical expertise, experience, skills and judgment. Not deliberately, but that's just how it's happened. We're starting to see a bit of a renaissance of no decision about me without me type of conversations going on, but certainly in terms of how things go with the new NICE atrial fibrillation guideline and that patient decision aid, the feedback that we're getting is that in some settings there's almost an unknowing about how to go about this within the consultation. It's almost as though we talk to some groups of clinicians and they have no concept that this might need to be a shared decision rather than the right decision for that individual based on the evidence. The balance has got out of kilter somehow, and we need to pull it back more into balance. And I think some of the decision-making stuff actually helps enormously in that. When you get to the task of the future is lots of elderly patients all on multiple medicines. The evidence isn't going to be there to decide what's the best thing to do for that particular individual, because it won't be constructed with that multiplicity of conditions. It will hinge on what does the patient want at this particular moment in time, in terms of do they want lots of interventions or do they want their symptoms controlling? What does the clinician know about people similar to that particular patient who they've looked after with their medicines and handled them in different ways, and these have been the outcomes? And it will reflect a little bit on what the best available evidence is for each of those individual conditions, but it will be largely individual conditions. So as we deal with an ageing population on multiple medicines, we have to rebalance this, because the guideline is only going to address part of the issue. Experts are good, in part, because they've learnt more. They've more knowledge about a particular domain. Cardiology is the domain for a cardiologist. Surgery is the domain for a surgeon, and so on. But keeping up to date with this volume of stuff ain't going to happen without some tactics. One of the key things in terms of the decision making is how you go about tactically addressing the information overload. But our cat chases birds in our garden, and our cat very rarely catches a bird. Only by chance will you have read the relevant paper pertinent to the condition that arrives this week. Some strategic approach is needed. More of that later. Are we ready for a bit of interaction? This is where you need a piece of paper and a pen. All set? A list of words follows. Do look at them once, don't reread them. When you've read the list, close your eyes. The closing your eyes is just a cue to me that you've stopped reading the list. Nothing horrible is going to happen. There isn't a gunk tank in the ceiling that's going to come. Okay, this is just a cue to me. Are you ready? Go. Bottom of the list, close your eyes. Most people there? Okay. Write down as many words as you can remember. I know you've been working all day. I hate doing this to you. The giggles have started already. Here we have the top 1% of intelligent life forms in North Staffordshire. How are we doing, guys? Still writing? So how many people have got 20 words? Okay, if I said 4 or 5? Yeah? About 4 or 5? Okay. So think of those books in the library, and you can manage 4 or 5 words in a 20-second memory test. Yeah? Just, anybody got more than 4 or 5? Go on, how many? 7? Okay, let's just check that you haven't misremembered any words. Has anybody misremembered a word? Yes? Yeah, 1 or 2 misremember. That's interesting in itself, isn't it? That we can mangle things so easily. The other thing is just to have a look and see where you've remembered the words from on the list. Are you an A or a B rememberer? Or are you a D or an E rememberer? Hands up for the A's and B's. Okay, about a third. D's and E's. It's working out very nice. It is about a third. And a bit all over the place. Yeah, great audience. It's about a third, and a third. So that's interesting as well, isn't it? Actually, what it shows nicely is that if you're reading a piece of text, sometimes you'll remember stuff from the top of it, but forget the rest. Some of you will more likely to remember things from the end of a piece of reading than from the top, and some of you are a bit scattergun and all over the place. But none of you remember everything. This is the work of Herbert Simon, who won the Nobel Prize for economics. He said, our rationality is bounded. It isn't possible, basically, to work so hard that you know everything. And even if you do a huge strategic, purposeful piece of work, there may well be stuff out there that you haven't captured, that you don't assess properly. So our rationality is bounded. And the usual approach of human beings is to collect just enough information to reduce our uncertainty to the point at which we're able to make a decision. That's an important phrase. Just enough information where we feel comfortable enough to be able to make a decision. That's called satisficing. Occasionally we'll be completely stuck, the satisficing approach doesn't work and we have to go away and maximise, but most of the time we're collecting just enough information for us to be able to feel comfortable enough to make a decision. And if you look at things like buying a car, who's bought a car in the last 3 years? Hands up. Okay, let's do a bit more audience participation. Tell us, now don't be afraid. Tell us how you went about buying a car.
I stuck with what I knew.
Okay.
The same manufacturer as I had before.
Yeah.
I wanted something economical.
Okay.
So I just looked at what they offered that
from that
satisfied that main criteria, really.
Great. Anybody else bought a car in the last 3 years? Okay, what were your tactics?
My tactics were that I didn't want to give the money to my kids, so I spent it on a car, in fact.
Okay.
And secondly, I always buy a foreign car, and always, by the one time in my life, I've been after an Audi for years, and I've just bought one.
Okay, splendid. Other tactics? Who else has had a go at car buying? Anybody? Go. Tell us how you went buying a car.
I looked at whatcar.com
to
find a review
for
a small car. I looked at reliability, and I looked at what I could afford, and then looked at payment options.
Okay. So we collected just enough information to reduce our uncertainty to the point at which we were able to make a decision. I've never met anybody that goes to the Society of Automotive Engineers website and reads the guideline on engine testing theory and practice 3rd edition, 700 pages. Do you get the analogy? You don't manage hypertension by reading the 700 pages of a guideline. Here's Surface Vehicle Electromagnetic Compatibility Standards Manual. And would you have made a better decision if you'd read those fine detailed bits? You don't actually need all of that fine detailed stuff. Lots of the education that we put in. So cellular biology, I guarantee you, it didn't help me as a GP to try and remember what the 3rd step of the Krebs cycle was. Yeah? Lots of this fine detail stuff we rub out eventually and don't need. We don't necessarily need all this stuff. We create enough information in order to be able to make a decision from what's around us. So this is probably, for me, one of the top 10 papers ever written. This is John Gabay and Andre LeMay describing how GPs go about making decisions. Clinicians rarely access, appraise and use explicit evidence directly from research or other formal sources. Rare exceptions are where they're stuck and they want to maximise. They didn't say that because they didn't know the cognitive psychology language, but that's what they're saying. Instead, they rely on what we've called mind lines as opposed to guidelines. Mind lines. So these are collectively reinforced, internalised tacit guidelines informed by brief reading, what car, but mainly their interactions with each other and with opinion leaders, patients and pharmaceutical representatives, and by other sources of largely tacit knowledge, so not written down anywhere. We create a picture in our head of what the evidence base is for how to diagnose something or how to treat something. It's a picture recognition, pattern recognition type of approach. This is the second Nobel Prize winner, and I want to describe Daniel Kahneman's work on dual process theory, and he worked with lots of other people. He obviously want to talk about Amos Tversky and lots of other people that he worked with, lots of other work other than just the contribution towards what's become known as dual process theory, but clearly a major influence, probably the world's leading psychologist. So who knows the story of Noah in the Bible? Anybody? No. Do you know the story of Noah in the Bible? Do you think you do? Go for it.
No!
Go on. Please tell us the story of Noah in the Bible. I'll help you out.
He built an ark.
Okay.
Because there was a flood.
Yeah.
And he saved... Well, he took animals of each species, 2 of each, onto the ark and his family.
Yeah. Keep going. And then the rains came.
Yeah.
The flood came. What happened then?
I don't know. They all survived. I can't remember.
Didn't he send out a bird, and the bird came back with nothing? A crow, wasn't it? Or a raven? Linda? And then a dove came back with an olive branch. And then he knew that there was land out there, and eventually the flood receded and was all saved. Yeah? That's the story of Noah? Round of applause. Come on, that was very good. Imagine you're working as a doctor in a remote village. It's the weekend, but no other healthcare professionals are around. But you have a new piece of technology called the Marveltron. The Marveltron will save the life of any patient you're treating, but you have to answer correctly the question the Marveltron asks of its attending doctor before it works its magic. A young child is brought to you. She's seriously ill and it appears that she will die imminently. You switch on the Marveltron and await the question. Now you must write down the answer to the Marveltron's question straight away. Importantly, you won't get blamed if you get the wrong answer. Okay, this is a good Samaritan thing. As long as you try and save the child's life, that's all you have to do. If you get the answer wrong, you will not be blamed. Are you ready? Piece of paper? Here we go. According to the Bible, how many giraffes did Noah take into the ark? Answer quickly, write it down. Child is dying, end of answer period. Okay. So, let's cut to the chase here, because we haven't got all night. How many people wrote down 2? Okay. So why did you write down 2, is my question. Because you told them that the animals went in 2 by 2. Yes? Yeah? But you've heard that before, haven't you? Where have you heard that before? Sunday school? Yeah? Songs. So Disney would be your evidence base for trying to save this child's life. Yeah? So it's really important we remember songs really well. So the songs that were in the hit parade when I was young, I can still sing along when they come on the radio. Yeah, you can remember words and songs that go back a long way. Even if you haven't heard them for decades, they still sit with you. It's another pattern recognition thing. Our brains are very good naturally at this pattern recognition thing. So, are we right with our answer 2? What the Bible actually says, Genesis chapter 7, of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by 7s, the male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean by 2. So you have to cross-reference to the appendix of Leviticus, and whatever has a cloven hoof and chews the cud, that's a clean beast. Yeah? Giraffes have cloven hooves. Here's the YouTube video link to giraffes chewing their cud. Giraffes are clean beasts, and therefore the correct answer is 14, not 2. It's the animals went in 14 by 14 if they were clean. That's the song. Okay. So your brains, I suspect, are now saying, not really sure about that, Neil. It's been the animals went in 2 by 2 since I was at Sunday school. Yeah? I've had, in workshops like this, people Googling Bible.com. Checking out as to whether I'm right. Our natural response is, if it disrupts the pattern that's already established of the animal going in 2 by 2, no, that can't possibly be true. Yeah? I've had an Orthodox Jewish pharmacist Google on his iPhone the Torah in Hebrew, an impressive feat in itself, and reading the Torah, disengaging from the workshop irritatingly, but nevertheless, but only for a few minutes, and he would come, gosh Neil, even in the Torah it's 14. So even beyond Genesis. So I guarantee you it is 14. But you'll have difficulty in accepting that it's 14 because the animals went in 2 by 2 has been drilled into your brain as a pattern. So this is dual process theory. There are 2 ways that we work out how to solve problems. If a patient presents and we've seen it before and we know what it is, we recognise it and we can decide very quickly, using what's called type 1 process, what it is. We can make a diagnosis quickly because we've got the pattern, we've seen it before, and we know what it is. We use our pattern recognition. If we don't recognise what it is, then we're into slower, more methodical, trying to work it out and look it up and ask more questions and all the rest of it to get to arrive at a diagnosis. Sometimes we'll get new information in and that will rationally override our first impression. Sometimes we'll get our type 1 processes disrationally and inappropriately overriding the new information that's come in, like the animals went in 14 by 14. That's what's going on with those of you who are experiencing that sensation at the moment. Yeah? It's actually dual process theory, because I'll show you in a second. Experiencing clinicians switch from making a diagnosis quickly to deciding what the emergency treatment is for that emergency and saving a life in less than a second, if you've got the patterns right and if your patterns are up to date. That's the challenge. So, all together, I want a Welsh choir here. Silverdale Methodists to the fore. All together, big breath in. What's the answer to this sum? Thank you, choir. That's type 1. You didn't have to think about it. You didn't have to work it out very long. I didn't see anybody working it out on their fingers. That's type 1. You know what it is. You've learnt it before. Yeah? All together, big breath in. What's the answer to this sum? That's type 2. You can't do it. You haven't learnt your 56 times table. Shame on you. You have to go away and work it out. Say out loud what you see on the next slide. Great. So the next time a Margaret Thatcher walks into your consulting room, you'll recognise a Margaret Thatcher, because you've got the pattern in your head, yeah? And you all recognised a Margaret Thatcher, despite the fact that she left office quite a number of years ago now. You've never met Margaret Thatcher, any of you, but nevertheless, straight away you were all there with Margaret Thatcher as a choir. Pattern recognition is very powerful. It's evolutionary derived. It's very important when you're in a difficult situation on the wild savannah of Eastern Africa as a very young human being, to be able to quickly recognise what's safe to eat and what makes you ill. What sort of an animal you can chase and catch, and what sort of animal will chase and catch and kill you. Who's a friend and who's an enemy. There's a survival advantage in be able to do pattern recognition. That's where it comes from. You can't actually turn it off, as I'll show you in a second. You can't stop yourself recognising patterns. And that in itself is a difficulty for us sometimes. What's this? Pattern recognition. Straight away, those of you who've seen shingles before know what shingles is. You don't have to work it out from first principles. What emergency treatment does a seriously ill adolescent need? Parenteral penicillin. This is meningococcal septicemia. That's that dual process theory. Quickly, pattern recognition, I know what this is. Quickly, I know what the emergency treatment is. You might save a life. Say out loud what you see on the next slide, if you've not seen this before. Okay, some of you have seen it before. People see the cow? Okay, let's go back to medical school. I'll be the professor of cowology. Note carefully the brow here and the ears and the eyes and the nostrils and the nose. I know all about this because I've spent 20 years studying that rare but very important and serious condition when a human being turns into a cow spontaneously. And I know all about this, and I've spent many years researching how to treat these things with drugs and surgery and all the rest of it. And we do all of this in the labs and on problem-based learning groups and in the lecture theatres, and I'd get you to read some stuff, and then we'd go onto the wards, and you'd say, what a great teacher, because all that stuff we did and we learnt about, yeah, I can see that the shape of the brow and the eyes and the nostrils and the ears, and all, it fits. It's not quite the same as we learnt about in the lecture theatre, but pretty close. That patient in the bed on ward 17 at the North Staffs is pretty much looking like the one that we were taught about in the lecture theatre. And then we'd do a few more bits, and I'd set you a few more tests, and we'd get to finals, and I'd ask you to do differential diagnosis. And if you could successfully pass that test, you'd be let loose into supervised practice and training. But there would be some point in this, because a couple of years later, one dark, late Saturday night when it was raining, a patient came in looking a bit like this. And can you see that that patient might just have turned into a cow? Can you see the brow, the ear, the eye, the nostrils here? Can everybody see that that might be a cow? The brain is filling in for some signs and symptoms, some bits of this pattern that isn't there, but that looks like a cow. And you might be able to say to your registrar, you know, I think this patient might have turned into a cow. What do you think? Yeah. And then a few years later, and you'd be quite right and gain lots of brownie points. Patient comes in looking like this. And some of you saw that before. If I say that's an ear, and that's an eye, and that's a nostril down here, can you start to see the cow now, where you couldn't see the cow a few minutes ago? Everybody got the picture of the cow in their head now? Okay, so look at the screen now. Close your eyes. Now open them again and try not to see the cow. Go back to where you were 2 minutes ago, unable to see the cow. And you can't, because the pattern recognition is very strong. Yeah? This is how System 1 and System 2 work with our pattern recognition. Here's the driver before their first driving lesson. They know that they couldn't take the car down the M6 in the rush hour. They're consciously incompetent. Doesn't sound like a great place to be, but it is. You're not going to get yourself into trouble if you know you can't do something. If you learn hard, don't like it, takes time. Yeah, we like being in System 1, but we sometimes have to be in System 2 because we have to learn new stuff. We all hate that. If we take some lessons, if we think about what we're doing when we're doing the driving test, we can just about pass our driving test. Yeah? At that point, we're consciously competent. If we think about what we're doing, we can just about do it okay. With practice, System 2 goes into System 1. The patterns are there. We can drive a car whilst planning the shopping list and what we have to do for today. Unconsciously incompetent, we can coast. We can switch out of coasting if somebody steps out into the road in front of us, or if the lights change suddenly, or whatever. We snap out of that coasting along in our System 1. Suddenly we're reacting much better. The problem of being in System 1 is that sometimes things change. Yeah? Suddenly the laws have changed for driving, or there's a diversion and suddenly we're going the wrong way, and then we're in dead trouble. Yeah? We have to assess what we're doing. And at that point, we're consciously incompetent again, and we have to learn again, and we go round and round and round. Who's this? Okay, that's your Pattern 1, your System 1 stuff. Who's this? Okay, this isn't Jesus Christ. I guarantee you this is a piece of toast. But you can't switch off your System 1. You're recognising Jesus Christ, yeah? Okay, close your eyes again. Think of the face of Adolf Hitler. Okay, so a fringe of hair scraped to one side and a moustache. Yeah? Everybody got the face of Adolf Hitler in their heads? Okay, look at the screen. This isn't Adolf Hitler. Okay? And this 2-bedroom end terraced house in Swansea isn't Adolf Hitler either. But some people, I don't see that one terribly well myself, but that makes, here's the sloping fringe, and here's the moustache, and here's the eyes, and some people think that reminds them of Adolf Hitler. So, who's this on the screen? Without standing on your head, because the picture is upside down, just keep your head straight up. I don't want to see any of this going on. Who's this? Okay, very good. Let me put 2 Margaret Thatchers up there. Now watch the right-hand Margaret Thatcher. Okay? Do you want me to do that again? Now turn your head on its side and look at both pictures. Both pictures have got the eyes and the mouth inverted. Yeah? Both pictures look like that. But your System 1 switches off when it's recognised Margaret Thatcher and you can't see the bits that have been changed because your pattern recognition is so strong, once you get to Margaret Thatcher, that's it. You stop at that point. Isn't that tricky? There was no explanation for this. This was done by Richard Thompson at York in 1981. And until we got the dual process theory, there was no real explanation as to how the brain was working when this was happening. So we can be fooled when we're in our system 1 particularly. Steve is very shy and withdrawn, invariably helpful but with little interest in people, in need for order and structure and a passion for detail. Which of these is it most likely that Steve is? Why are you giggling? You just see the word pharmacist. I love pharmacists to bits. But yes, they do have a need for order and a passion for detail. Lots of them do anyway. Not everybody. There are some atypical pharmacists in this very room. But you're right. And librarians the same? Was other people thinking librarian was that sort of stuff? Okay. That is your brain switching immediately into creating a pattern, not this time from a picture, but from these words. And then you apply that stereotypical pattern to these sorts of people. Yeah? And of course that's base rate neglect. What you've forgotten to do is work out how many of these are there in the country. And actually there are loads more farmers than any of these. So even if a tiny percentage of farmers were introverted and had these traits, numerically they would still be more likely to be a farmer than any of the other things. But your pattern recognition switches in and you want to use it in preference to any other approach to decision making. System 1 dominates, pattern recognition dominates, and it's really hard to stop it. There are about 100 of these cognitive biases. I'm not going to go into them now. There isn't time. But the most missed fracture in the A&E department, what do you think it is? On an X-ray. What do you think the most missed fracture is? Any ideas? Wrist? No. 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 The most easily missed fracture is the second fracture, because we tend to look on the X-ray for something that's broken to explain why this particular bit of the body is hurting, and we stop at that point. That's called search satisficing. Yeah. The most important thing is blind spot bias, the thinking that other people are susceptible to these biases, but I'm not, and of course everybody is. Particularly availability bias. So we've seen something recently. We find it really difficult to prescribe an evidence-based medicine for somebody when they need it, when the last person we gave it to had a really terrible side effect. Yeah? Lots of these. We haven't got time to go into this. This has serious consequences. This difficulty in moving away from the animals went in 2 by 2. Yeah? Or this is Margaret Thatcher and I can't see the eyes, has really important consequences. Here's the prescribing by English GPs of diclofenac. The context here is that we discovered that non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs might increase cardiovascular risk. And a systematic review published in the BMJ reporting that, saying that it included diclofenac as increasing cardiovascular risk, was published at this point in the middle of 2006. Note the remarkable effect on GPs prescribing from the publication of that important key paper in the leading journal that most people get. Doesn't change a bit. We're still at about 46% of all anti-inflammatories prescribed being diclofenac. Here's the letter to all doctors from the MHRA saying there's a cardiovascular risk with these traditional NSAIDs. You might want to think about your prescribing. It doesn't seem to apply to ibuprofen and naproxen, at least at standard doses. Note the remarkable effect on the patterns that are already established. We're still pressing D on the computer keyboard when we want to select a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, because that's the pattern. At this point, we published from the National Prescribing Centre a review of the evidence and sent out people to talk face to people, to do a bit more persuading, and things start to shift a bit. Here's the northeast, so they're coming down quite nicely. Here's the West Midlands, who thought, where we are now, thought about it a bit, and then got the bit between their teeth. Southeast coast didn't change at all until here. What do you think happened at this point? It wasn't the Daily Mail, although sometimes that does shift things. It wasn't off the market, no. At this point we included prescribing items in the quality and outcomes framework, so we started paying people for doing the right thing. So that accelerated the adoption of the evidence when it was a systems approach was linked with the educational approach. But it takes a long time to get there, and we still have, in 2013, this on the BBC News, this as being new news, whereas we've known it for 6 or 7 years beforehand. Shifting the patterns is really difficult. So why do people continue to prescribe in that way? Are the people who've continued to prescribe in that way unintelligent, lazy, uncaring or uncommitted? I go around the country and I don't meet anybody who meets any of these criteria. People are working their socks off to do the best they can. Their batting average, they're trying desperately to get to that 1.000. You see that sort of prescribing data and you want to give them a slap, don't you? But they're not doing it because they're bad people. They're doing that simply because they're human beings. And the acquisition of expertise takes time. Changing from where you are now to where you want to go, moving from a novice to an expert takes a lot of time. Getting your batting average as good as it can be isn't going to happen instantaneously. So over the past couple of months I've been conducting an experiment on myself. This is me relearning to play cribbage, a game taught to me by my father when we lived about a mile down the hill. You don't have to know anything about cribbage. I don't need to explain cribbage to you. It's a card game. Yeah? Except these days you can play it on an app, on an iPad. And the app gives you instant performance feedback. It tells you when you're getting it wrong. So here's the feedback from me starting to relearn cribbage. So I'm missing 8 points, 11 points, 2 points, 18 points and so on. But the trend overall, the mean, is going down, yeah? To the point where I've learned how to play cribbage again. You might think. Except I've just got to the point where I can just about manage it once. I'm consciously competent as long as I think hard, yeah? If we stretch that feedback out, so here we are, I've come down and I've learned how to do it. Look what then happens. I get worse again. I'm relying on my patterns too much, yeah? I'm not checking out, I'm not thinking and reflecting. My system one is dominating and I'm actually going up here. I'm not as big a variance, my errors are not as big as they were when I was a complete novice, but I'm actually getting worse. At which point we have one particular game where I make a complete rollocks and give myself a real talking to and say, come on, you're supposed to know how to do decision making, you need to calibrate a bit more, you need to recheck, you need to just briefly stop and have another look. And that's what happens. So feedback loops are really important. Being open to that feedback is really important, and recognising that sometimes, this is international travel and jet lag, sometimes if you're hungry, angry, late, tired, those affective biases will kick in and make you more susceptible to having a poor batting average that day. I think this is probably where we were with all this stuff 3 years ago. We had a few planks of wood, we knew roughly in what order they should go, and we were nailing them approximately in the direction for a bridge on the opposite bank. I think we've got better than that now. I think we've got better data, we've read more, we've talked to more people, and we've got a much better idea of where this now needs to go. We need to recognise that there are different translations needed in the evidence base. This is research to national guidance. That's the sort of stuff that at NICE we do fantastically well. But there are two other translations needed that both have different strategies. One is to translate from the national guidance into a local care pathway. That requires a different approach to the one that constructs the guidance. And once you've got the local care pathway in place, you've still got to have those wonderful, fascinating, endlessly complex conversations with individual patients, eliciting their values, needs and preferences, as well as your own values and preferences, and recognising that theirs are just as legitimate as yours. And that requires a completely different translation from that. And that's a completely different translation from that. That's an important thing that I think helps in terms of where we need to go. I think we've recognised now that that is coming up and that needs help in order to manage the polypharmacy stuff. Jonathan's going to talk to you about the information needs and how we handle the information flows. That's pretty much bottomed now, I think. We can definitely do that sort of stuff. And whilst this appears a little bit on some curricula for some undergraduate training, it's little in there for most postgraduate training, where that crucial movement is from novice towards expert. We expect people to become experts in their postgraduate training, but we don't tell them how experts are experts. And if you ask an expert, how are you an expert? They have no idea how they've become an expert because it's not on the curriculum. Yeah? And there are lots of things here that we could include as a core curriculum. Probably the most important thing is knowing what's about decision making and what's going on, and recognising what's going on whilst it's going on. We'll do a bit of calibration, the stop and think moment. They don't just rely on the pattern, have a little stop and think moment when we've in the second half. We've talked about the feedback system, and we know now from lots of other research in other domains that actually knowing about decision making means improved decision making. All we have to do, from my own research over the last year, independently evaluated, about to be submitted for publication, is that actually if you tell people about decision making, they know about decision making and they can reflect that in their work far better. So all we have to do is raise awareness. Last slide. This is JFK. In 1961, when JFK took office, the very young administration, relatively inexperienced administration, 8th day in office, the CIA come and see him in the Oval Office and say, there's a bit of a problem in Cuba. Fidel Castro and Che Guevara had overthrown the previous Batista government, so we had a communist state 90 miles off the coast of Florida. And more than that, the CIA were training up Cuban exiles in Guatemala, ready to go back and invade Cuba and free it from the yoke of communist oppression. And the president was asked to make a go, no-go decision, and he deferred, and they went away and had lots of meetings, and it went on and on and on for several months. And in the end, a go, no-go decision was being pressed for all sorts of reasons, and President Kennedy said go. And they sent the exiles in at the Bay of Pigs, and they got slaughtered by this fantastically efficient fighting machine who just won the War of Independence in Cuba, of course. Complete disaster for Kennedy administration. He went on television and said, I'm going to institute an inquiry into how we made such a poor decision. So they went away and studied decision making and came up with a number of recommendations, particularly in the way how groups of people operated at this sort of political level with these sorts of key decisions, and they refined their approaches and learnt from that mistake. What happened a year later? Cuban Missile Crisis. Cuban Missile Crisis went a lot better. Perhaps because the Kennedy administration had learnt about decision making and operated much better, and we're probably sitting here today because people studied decision making. I'll leave it to you to decide whether studying decision making is important. Thank you very much.